In this Putin speech, he makes a very shocking statement. Ukraine does not want peace because then they will have to answer to their people. That's what Putin said. Well, let's check it out.
I have one question related to sports, with the Olympics, which will be held in France next year. Before asking this question, I want you all to applaud our Daniil Medvedev, who fought in the final of the US Open in New York. In general, the final there turned out well. A Russian and a Serb played. Two Orthodox people. Let's say thank you to Daniel for being able to do this. But I watched this broadcast. There was no our flag. There was no mention that he is from Russia. About the Olympics, which will be held in France next year, Macron said that there will be no Russian flags, no Belarusian flags, nothing. What can you say to our athletes, for whom the Olympics is the goal of their lives? They are waiting for it, but they will have to miss it. I will say the following. Of course, first of all, we must be guided by the interests of the athletes in this situation, and each of them, who has been preparing for the most important competitions for years, some decades, must make a certain decision for themselves. But as for the Olympic movement itself, I would say the following. I think that today's leadership of international federations, the International Olympic Committee itself, they are perverting the original idea of Pierre de Coubertin. Sport should be outside of politics. It should not divide, but unite people.
Exactly. That's true.
What has happened in recent decades? The Olympic movement has fallen into the trap of financial interests. There has been an unacceptable commercialization of international sport and the international Olympic movement. And as a result of this commercialization, degradation occurred. What I'm talking about, sponsors, advertising time, leading Western companies, which ultimately create the economic and financial basis for the functioning of the International Olympic Committee itself and the entire movement as a whole. They, in turn, are directly dependent on the political structures and governments of their countries. This whole chain has led to the fact that international sport and the Olympic movement itself are degrading. They are not fulfilling their most important functions. And the point is not only about setting records, but about uniting people. But the international Olympic movement has lost this function. And this is very unfortunate for the Olympic movement itself, because, one way or another, alternative movements will be created. Nothing can be done about it. This is an objective process. Next year we will hold the Friendship Games. We will hold competitions within the BRICS framework. And everyone who is depoliticized will participate in this with pleasure. This will correspondingly kill today's international structures. We need to update them.
Need to remind them.
And we also need to update their personnel. Therefore, it is unfortunate that this is happening. But, of course, we will protect the interests of our athletes. This is the first. And second, we will create alternative opportunities for them, including the financial results of their achievements. The Ministry of Sports presented statistics at the WEF or before the WEF. 55 athletes in Olympic sports changed their Russian citizenship to something else. Together with non-Olympic athletes, there are already more than 100 of them. Do you understand these people? I already said this at the beginning of my answer. People have been moving towards some goal for decades, but now, for political reasons, they cannot achieve it. But, you know, there is one more component. Well, I don't know if it's possible to say that, but, nevertheless, some say that sports and competitions at the international level are like a sublimation of war. There's something to it. But I don't blame anyone. But for an athlete, especially a high-class one, when he stands on the podium, the anthem of his country sounds and the flag banner is raised. This also has a certain meaning. But ultimately, Each person makes his own choice. I think so. I'll ask one last question. We began today's plenary session by declaring 10 years ago that the Far East, Siberia, and the Arctic are a priority for us. Still, I would like to look a little ahead and reflect on the image of the Far East, Siberia, and in general the image of Russia in 10 years. Let's say, now we see some kind of such reincarnation on a new level. Perhaps we can compare it with the Soviet Union, when there were pioneers, and now the movement of the first has appeared. At one time, the music of the Soviet anthem returned to us. At the VDNKH exhibition we are currently preparing an exhibition Russia. And this also reminds us of what it was like then. For example, the image of the future for Ukraine is drawn clearly. This is membership in NATO and membership in the EU. In the West, the image of the future also looks somewhat rosy. What will this image of the future be like for Russia? You just said that for some countries the image of the future is for them to be members of some organizations, NATO or the European Union. Do you understand what you said? That is, they are for an image of the future associated not only with interaction with someone, but they are for an image of the future associated with their complete dependence on someone, defensively. They need someone to cover them. Otherwise they won't be able to. In the economic sphere, they need money to be allocated from the appropriate funds. Otherwise they will not rise. By the way, no one wants peace in Ukraine, because if this war stops, then they will have to answer to the people for the economic and social components. But they have nothing to show. I doubt.
So they wanted to continue for that?
That after the end of hostilities there would be any process of restoration of the Ukrainian economy. Who will feed them there? I doubt it. Our future depends on us. I recently met with young scientists in the city of Sarov. They asked me too. Or at least we talked about it. What we were talking about. I want to say this. Maybe in a different format. But I want to repeat the same idea. Scientists are busy with their research. Industrialists work in the sphere of material production, in agriculture, in industry. Cultural figures create images in order to support our values, which underlie the spiritual world of every person and every citizen. Of course, all this together will give us results. All this must translate into the fact that our country, including in the field of security and defense, must be self-sufficient. But this does not mean the isolation of our country. This means that we, in cooperation with our partners and with friends, in integration with the vast majority of countries that represent the majority of the world's population, we will develop our own country and make it even stronger. I have already spoken about industry, about science, and so on. But at the same time, we must necessarily preserve the soul of Russia.
You see, the way Putin speaks, he really speaks as a nationalist, like his interest and priority is Russia. But then you hear speculations around the media that he's a globalist. Why do people call him a globalist? Yeah, the whole statement has been Russia, our future is dependent on us. We're trying to make our military self-sufficient, our economy sufficient. He's not speaking about taking over the world. He's speaking about Russia and saying we're going to work with our friends to enhance our nations. But he's not saying we're going to take over other nations. Yeah, I just thought I should pinpoint that most of the speech here has been about Russia and, the future of Russia, the betterment of Russia.
The soul of our multinational and multi-religious people. This humanitarian component, together with science, with education, together with real production, will be the basis on which our country will move forward, feeling and understanding itself as a sovereign, fully independent state with development prospects. So it will be. After all, look, this will happen despite all the restrictions that have been imposed on Russia. What were they hoping for? They hoped that our financial system would fall apart, the economy would collapse, enterprises would stop, and teams of thousands would be left without work. After all, nothing happened. Based on last year's results, Russia entered the top 5 largest economies in the world in terms of purchasing power parity and economic volume.
With all the sanctions.
We have every chance to continue moving along this path. Yes, I said, our inflation has increased a little, but it is within the appropriate indicators. Unemployment is at a historic low of 3%. This has never happened. There is only 3% unemployment in our country. Yes, in this regard, some other issues with labor resources arise, but they are also being resolved. For the first time in several years, real incomes of the population are growing. Yes, these are modest incomes. I talked about this, but the trend is correct. Both real disposable income and real wages are rising. All this together gives us every reason to believe that Russia not only has such a reliable and good future, but this future is secured through the efforts of our entire multinational people. I would like to conclude by saying that this sounds like an election program, but we can't talk about it until December. Thank you very much. We will conclude our plenary session. We talked for almost 3 hours. We tried to answer many questions, but it was impossible to grasp the immensity. Therefore, Madam Vice President of Laos, thank you very much for coming. Vladimir Vladimirovich, thank you very much for answering all my questions. Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone.
Wow, that was a long speech. Yeah, the man seems like he's doing right by Russia. I'm not in Russia, so I'm just going off what I saw on the video and what I've been seeing on videos. But you tell me if you're in Russia, feel free to share. He said unemployment is at 3%. Russia is now in the top 5 largest economies in the world. Talk to me about that. It seems like Russia is thriving regardless of the sanctions and the bad media representation and all of those things. Seems like they're doing very well. And he's even optimistic about the future, which is reflective that you're going to do even better. Well, feel free to share your thoughts. And also with regards to the comments that Ukraine does not want peace because then they will have no answer to their people. What do you think about that comment? Feel free to talk to me about it. It's the end of this one. Smash the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.